I'm Blair Beasley with Emory University. It's been a real pleasure working with so many of you to put together the Georgia Climate Conference. There have been so many great presentations and discussions today, and we could not be more excited for this afternoon plenary session, the business case for climate action. Georgia's private sector plays a critical role in shaping how Georgia responds to the challenge at hand. We know companies' bottom lines are impacted by a changing climate, and that businesses in our state can and will drive innovative solutions. We began planning this conference months ago, and during our public call for ideas, we are delighted when the Georgia Chamber of Commerce submitted a number of great ideas. And that has led us to today, where the Chamber has organized this plenary session to talk about the business case for climate action. With that, I'd like to introduce Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber, to kick off the afternoon plenary. Chris has been President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber since 2010. Prior to joining the Georgia Chamber, he served as Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and as Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Economic Development, among other positions. Chris. Thanks so much.
Well, good afternoon. All right, I'm a Chamber of Commerce guy, so we have to try that again. Good afternoon. Much better, thank you. Listen, all five of us are acutely aware that we stand between you and cocktails, but we still think that this is an important discussion to have. And so what we're going to do is we're all going to get up and talk a few minutes about our perspectives on climate, and then hopefully we'll have time to do a little bit of Q&A before we go get cocktails this afternoon. So I want to start and kind of give you a macro position and share with you a little data and a little polling and kind of how the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia business community as a whole looks at this. And then you're going to get to hear from my friends up here as they go into some specifics and more details. Now, our organization is tracking what we believe are kind of 9 critical kind of core global trends that are impacting Georgia. And the interesting thing about these trends, some of them are a direct result of climate change. Some of them give us an opportunity as businesses in Georgia to make a difference in climate change. Now, I will tell you, I do a long presentation that goes over all 9 of these. I'm not going to bore you with that today. I just want to spotlight a couple of them. But I do think, I want to unpack them real quick for you so you understand. I'm going to come back and talk about urbanization and sustainability in a minute. But this idea of digital transformation and the digital disruption that we're seeing in every business sector out there gives us a ton of opportunities to share data about how to improve climate, how to address critical needs, but also what those opportunities are out there. When we look at things like mass automation, the United States is going to see 89 million jobs over the next 10 years automated to artificial intelligence. Some of that's going to be good for the environment. Some of it's going to cause us some critical issues that we're going to have to face from an electorate standpoint. And do those people have good, meaningful jobs in the long run? Global connectiveness, how we do international trade, what we grow here, where we sell it all around the world is important. This issue of economic mobility. Georgia, like many states and many countries, we're seeing a growing economic discrepancy out there. In fact, in Georgia, if you look back a few years ago, maybe 10 to 20 years ago, 60% of all the families that lived in Georgia were in the middle class. Today, it's only 50%. And so if you can't pay for food for your kid, do you think you're really going to care about the climate? Are you going to care about what happens in the environment? No, you're not. And so we have to care about those issues as well. And then probably one of the hardest things that we're going to have to deal with to address this issue of climate is this growing political disruption that we have in the system, this tribalism that we're seeing. And if you watch the results from Tuesday night, what we saw was a widening divide between suburban and urban voters and rural voters. In fact, here's a great statistic for you. In the most recent poll asked of general population voters in America, do you care, or should climate policy be a priority for our elected officials? 82% of Democrats said yes, absolutely. Anybody want to guess what the Republican number was? Wasn't that good? It was only 17%. And so what's happened is we've made this issue of environmental sustainability, we've made this issue of conservation, this issue of climate into a partisan issue. And so from a business community, we're kind of the sensible center, right? We're the middle. We're not Republican, we're not Democrat. We might be more conservative than we are liberal on some issues. On other issues, we go the other way. But if you really want to have a meaningful dialogue and we want elected officials to deal with these issues, the business community has a critical role to play and can play that role to bring people together. And I'd argue with you, in Georgia, particularly over the last 30 years, when you look at significant environmental policy changes, the business community has been there and in often cases led Republicans and Democrats alike. So let me back up to two of these global trends and how they impact Georgia. Good news for you, I only have 2 slides versus my normal 45. So this issue of urbanization is happening in Georgia just like it's happening all over the world. You know, in 1800, 3% of the population lived in cities, which means 97% of all of us worked and toiled and had a connection to the land and a connection to the environment, and we protected it. We knew that if we wanted to grow crops next year, we had to do certain things, and we knew if we wanted clean water for our families, we had to protect our water sources. What we're seeing now are more and more people moving to these urban areas. In fact, by 2030, just in 10 years, 2/3 of everyone in the world will live in a city. And I have to argue with you that if you're living in that city, you're probably not as connected to the outdoors, you're not connected to the environment, and you might not have the same appreciation that if you grew up in a small South Georgia farm town like I did, if you grew up hunting and fishing, it's a very different environment. What we're seeing is that's happening in Georgia too. If you want to go out over the next 30 years in Georgia, so today we're at about 11 million people. Half live in Atlanta, half live all over the rest of the state. And you can divide that up by about 1/4 of the rest of them live in our second-tier cities and 1/4 live in our rural communities. By 2050, we're going to be a state of 15 million, which we can absorb that to a degree. But the difficult part is Atlanta will become a community of almost 9 million people. So 2/3 are going to be living here. So how many of you live in Atlanta today or in the Atlanta area? All right, so here's real bad news for you. You don't get depressed enough through this stuff. So just between now and 2030, we're going to add 1 million residents just in Atlanta alone. Guess how many cars that equals on the road? It's 1 million more cars in Atlanta alone, 1.5 million statewide. So if you're a car dealer, things are looking great. If you're sitting in traffic, you're not. And that impacts your quality of life, it impacts the environment and everything else that you care about and that we work on. We also have to think about how do we connect these young men and women in these city environments, this next generation of Zoomers, which I have one at home, the generation of millennials, how do you connect them back to the outdoors, particularly if they're all living in these urban centers? So we have the issue of urbanization that does impact climate, does impact everything we do about the environment. One of the things I was very proud of, and I had an argument yesterday with a former legislator when I was DNR commissioner, the thing that I liked most and the thing that I was so mad about is during the tenure that I was there, we had to cut the budget. But we presented a plan to put more state parks around Atlanta, and we built the one in Hall County, we built the one in Coweta County. And my argument with the legislator, he said, "Aren't you proud that I got you that money?" And Jeffrey, I said, "Yeah, I was, but you never gave me money to run those parks." So you kind of need both of those to make it work. But at least we've had a plan to connect people in our city and urban centers back to the environment. So there's opportunities and risk involved in this issue of urbanization. And then there's this growth and this global trend around sustainability that comes directly from what consumers want, what people want. And so you're finally starting to see the business community take this issue of sustainability extraordinarily seriously because it impacts their bottom line. Their shareholders want it, their consumers want it, the employees want their companies. You know, a lot of times businesses are made out to be the big and bad guy. Any movie you watch from Hollywood, business is the bad guy, but the fact is businesses make decisions today on where to locate and where to grow based upon the quality of life because what matters to them is talent. If I can attract talent, I can grow my business, I can grow my innovation, but if I live in and work in a place where it's not a great quality of life, when there are environmental problems or disasters, I'm not going to get the workers I want and they're not going to be happy and successful. And so they're caring more and more about sustainability. Some of these statistics are enough to scare you if you're in business or in any walk of life. The fact that in the next 20 years we could lose 50% of all of our wildlife, these are global numbers, but these are Georgia numbers too. And if you like to fly fish like I do, you care about those numbers. The fact is in Georgia and the rest of the world, we're going to need 40% more energy, 50% more food, and 30% more water. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I just checked and they're not making any more water. we got what we got, right? Now, our green energy partners are going to talk to you all about what we're doing on the energy side. And our farmer, our friend up here is going to talk to you about what we're doing on the ag side. But these issues are making a difference. And I will tell you, from the perspective of the business community, anytime we've had these crises, we've responded. If you look at what happened from the business community in the 1990s, when we had an air quality disaster that was happening in the state, businesses changed their policies. They invested in nonprofits. They invested to create new organizations. They invested in committees. They put their money where their mouth was. In the 2000s, in the middle of the worst drought that we've ever had in the history of the state of Georgia, yes, we prayed for rain. I was there at the prayer breakfast, but at the same time, we passed what was absolutely a state-of-the-art water conservation law, and that was led by the business community coming to the table and say, yes, we'll do the hard things. We'll spend more money. It'll hurt our bottom line, but we'll go out there and do it. Farmers stepped up and said, we're going to do the right thing, right? We were all in that together. Even if you look at recently, and maybe not as crisis of an issues, but things like how we save the gopher tortoise, right? That's a partnership with the business community, with state government, with the private sector. When you look at the land conservation bill that was passed last year, the Georgia Chamber was proud to support that bill, be out there, do all we could for it, promoted it to everybody that we knew in the state of Georgia to get that thing passed. And so there are opportunities out there, there are risks out there. And if you hear nothing else, what I want you to take away today is that the business community, we've been a strong advocate. You just look at land conservation or everything else. We've been a strong advocate for environmental policies. We need as a partnership between all your different groups out there and our group and others is to move this from being a partisan issue to being a bipartisan issue or even a nonpartisan issue, right? So that we can all be around the same table without demonizing each other and realizing everybody brings something to the table. Let's have this discussion. And lastly, know that you can trust this business community in Georgia. I can't speak for any other business community anywhere else. But in Georgia, we've got environmental leaders in our businesses, in our companies that want to work together, that want to make a difference. And you're going to hear from some of those guys right now. So we're going to move this along because I'm keenly aware of the cocktail situation. So my friend Wyatt Boutwell with CEA is going to come up, give you a little overview, and then we're going to kind of go down the row here, and then we'll come back and ask some questions at the end. So y'all welcome to the stage, Wyatt. Wyatt, come on up.
Well, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and it's a privilege to be with you all here. And I really want to thank the Georgia Climate Conference for the opportunity to be with you. And the Consumer Energy Alliance is the voice of the American energy consumer, and we advocate for affordable, clean, and reliable energy for American businesses and families. And we support a broad energy mix for the economy through campaigns for wind, solar, and traditional energy infrastructure. And so today I want to talk a little bit about Georgia's economic growth, its emissions profile, and its energy mix. And I will also highlight some consumer impacts in recent years, along with some observations about opportunities and challenges for energy policy for the state. I want to give you a little bit of a global picture as we move forward. This is really the trillion-dollar question, okay? How do we decouple CO2 emissions growth from GDP growth? As you can see from this chart, on a global scale, CO2 emissions growth seems to accelerate and decelerate with GDP. But they seem to be connected, and there are some encouraging trends that I do want to mention that takes us really into the picture of growth for the state of Georgia. So this is Georgia's growth since 1990 to forward to 2018. GDP growth is about 300%, and while population growth is about 60%. So just to give you a context, we should probably see with the next slide increases in emissions if we look at the global trend lines. But the reason this is important, I really want to talk about emissions here, bless you, is that the World Health Organization identifies outdoor air emissions as a major cause of death and disease globally. So emissions are not anything that we should just scoff at. And they attribute emissions such as particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxides to lung cancer, respiratory infection, heart disease, and stroke. And these aren't without economic impacts either, because these air emissions increase healthcare costs, they decrease labor productivity, and they actually lead to a decline in agriculture. Now, I've just shown you a slide up here that shows the trends of these emissions in the state of Georgia since 1990. And I want to give you just a list of the reductions since that time. 58% reduction in nitrogen oxides, 95% reduction in sulfur dioxide, 60% reduction in carbon monoxide, while 49% reduction in VOCs. And particular matter, both fine and coarse, has come down 42 and 45% respectively, with a 14% decrease in ammonia. And along with this chart runs from 1990 to 2016 with Georgia's CO2 emissions. But even in this time period of robust economic growth and also population growth, we're seeing reductions in CO2 emissions. So this raises the question, along the way, what has changed fundamentally? I know that, Chris, you made mention about coalitions of business owners with not-for-profits, but looking at the energy mix, what is different now than it was, say, 1998, 10 years ago? The change in the energy mix. You'll see two lines, one black and one orange on the chart up there. The orange would be nuclear, and the black would be coal. At the very, very end, about 1998, you can barely see the light green, which is going to be the contribution of natural gas into this mix. And you'll see probably about 2012 where you'll see nuclear, coal, and natural gas converge to be roughly the same parity within the energy mix for the state. Now, 2008 is a critical year. It's not only the year of a great recession, which I came out of law school to embrace. This is the time period in which unconventional oil and gas production started to come online. And so natural gas entered the market. And so you can see over time to 2018 that natural gas really started to displace coal. And as of today, or at least the most recent figures, natural gas constitutes about 41% of energy generation for the state, or at least electric generation, while nuclear is 26% and coal 25%. With renewables like hydro included in that mix at 8%. The reason I want to bring this up too is look at the diversity of fuel sources that are present in 2018 compared to, say, even 1998. You go from 2 to an enormous mix with renewables entering the space. So this next chart, I'm trying to be quick. I'm from Alabama, so we're slow-speaking folks, so the challenge is great, so you just bear with me. I'll do everything I can. Try to respect everybody else's time. This is a chart of natural gas prices and also production volumes. And you can see about 2008 is when you start seeing a tremendous upswing in natural gas production, which is the unconventional boom of natural gas. And you're also starting to see a trend line downward with natural gas prices. So the question is, what has that meant for Georgia? Georgia's not a producer of natural gas. It is a consumer of natural gas. What does this mean for Georgians? And I want to point this out. The amount of natural gas savings that have accrued to energy consumers in the state, those are families and businesses, has been remarkable. $11.7 billion between 2007 and 2017, with residential consumers saving $4.2 billion, commercial consumers saving $2.1 billion, and industrial users saving $5.4. And I want to make a point here about energy poverty. Savings in natural gas has a tangible impact on the quality of life in the state because energy poverty is a real challenge here. 15% of the population of Georgia lives on or below poverty, and they will spend almost 1/4 of their income on their energy use, either that's transportation, fuel, could be heating, could be cooling. At a time, your energy burden should be about 6% of your income. So natural gas has contributed not only to lower emissions profile, but to a higher standard of life and quality of life for Georgians. And I want to show this slide too. This is about the growth of solar. As I mentioned before, we campaign for wind and for solar alongside conventional sources of energy. And the NPR had a story, I think it was back in April, talking about the growth of solar within the state without the presence of a renewable portfolio standard, okay? And it's showing that with the proper resource, with the proper people, actually lower land cost and people that really, both private and public stakeholders, you could have robust growth in renewables without the involvement of a mandate from the state. And so I think this is helpful to see the trajectory of growth within the state of Georgia and also look at other states that are adjacent in the southeast and see that solar is going to continue to grow in its importance. So as I close, well, I got to go back. Is this the key for going back? Oh my, there we go. Just some observations quickly. We should focus on low-hanging fruit, okay? And I mentioned natural gas because of its capacity to displace coal. If you're looking at emissions profiles, particularly as we look farther out in the complete supply chain, natural gas has contributed a great deal to lowering energy costs for the state and also has opportunities for growth globally. Nuclear, I think that Vogtle is going to be bringing reactors on here in the next year or two, which will add to the importance of nuclear for the state, and as well talking about solar and its accelerated growth. So there's some low-hanging fruit here in which you have the proper policy tools and really actually have the right mix of business for the environment which you're operating. And one of the challenges we see, I want to make mention of how important NIMBY is. How many of you are familiar with the acronym? I think most everybody is. It doesn't matter what source you're talking about. You can have the best sources with the best economics, and you can be very frustrated by poor public opinion of projects. This past week, I was talking with a landman with NextEra, which is the largest wind producer in the United States, and he had a problem with permitting in states like Kansas and Oklahoma. So trying to have a broader public education, which is part of the function of CEA about the importance of energy, plays into making sure that we have the least carbon intensive source available because it's not blocked by public opinion. So I think there's an opportunity for public education. And finally, you have to have integration of market opportunity with innovation, which feeds into really the theme of this panel, to have significant success. And in the energy space, I would put it to you this way. The marriage of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling changed the way that the United States has viewed its energy position in the world. And natural gas has led to lower emissions, as I already indicated, and we can see some greater opportunities from that as well. But there's also carbon capture, CO2 sequestration, and a host of technologies that my colleagues will talk about a little bit later on. But the challenge is to create the proper environment in which market participants want to innovate rather than feel forced to comply with additional rules. And so thankfully, this is one of the few issues in R&D that both Republicans and Democrats at the federal level can agree upon. The funding levels for research and development into these technologies is a non-political issue if you look at some of the bills that are out there and some of the trajectories with it. So that's really my summary of looking at the convergence of natural gas and its ability to lower the carbon profile for the state, and also some of the opportunities and benefits that have accrued to consumers. And I look forward to visiting with these panelists here shortly. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Bradley with Cox Enterprises. I don't have any slides. I thought I would just talk to you all about what we're doing here. Yeah, go no slides. So, you know, Cox is a 121-year-old privately owned company. I think we're still the largest private company in the state of Georgia. Family-owned, fourth-generation leadership in place right now. When Governor Cox founded the company, founded it under the principle of, you know, if you do the right thing for your employees and your community, everything from a business standpoint is going to work out fine. And so you fast forward, you know, a couple generations later, back in the mid, you know, sort of 2005, 2006, his grandson, Jim Kennedy, who was the CEO at the time, founded our sustainability program called Cox Conserves, because Jim really loved the natural environment, and he had seen where he grew up change so much over the course of his life that he really decided that it was his mission in life to make it Cox's mission that they would leave the world a better place from an environmental standpoint, by eliminating their environmental impact, on the planet. And so a huge fundamental change occurred when we did that and how we thought about business. We started considering the environment in every business decision that we made and weighing the more costs than just the financial, and people costs of those decisions. And so what was interesting is I was there from the beginning, created the program, managed it, nurtured it through its infancy to where it is today. And what we realized about 5 or 6 years ago, even though we were on track, we have date certain neutral goals in carbon, water, and waste, that we had first gotten a lot of the easy stuff done. We always think about sustainability in terms of being around another 121 years as a company, and so we have to have financial responsibility as well as, doing the right thing for the environment. And it was getting a lot harder to do those things. We also realized that there were big picture environmental issues that we had to solve on a larger scale than we had at Cox. And so that led me to create a new initiative at Cox. I no longer do environmental sustainability at Cox. I'm now running a new endeavor that we call Cox Clean Tech, which is to do two things. One is to create growth and diversification for the company. So what does Cox look like for the next 121 years? So building the next division of the company. But also to do that in a way that leaves the planet a better place. And so the reason we call it Cox Clean Tech is that diversification is happening in a space from a resource efficiency standpoint. And so those are my guardrails. Is I am building a multi-billion-dollar business that focuses sort of in that swim lane of leaving the world a better place. And what's exciting about that is while Cox eliminating its footprint is fantastic, and hopefully it will influence others that you can do this if you are a for-profit entity, that won't really change the trajectory of where we're going as a planet. If I'm successful in building a business with that focus, we literally can have planetary positive trajectory change from an environmental standpoint. And that's what really gets me up every day and gets me excited. And so as I think about how we look at investing in this space and building a business, I look at it from really two different aspects. One is efficiency. It's all the things that we had been doing in environmental sustainability for all these years. How do you do more with less? How do you do it more efficiently? How do you throw away less? How do you use less? And all those kind of things. And that's what we have to do from like a greenhouse gas emission standpoint. That's what we have to do from a water standpoint. That's what we have to do from waste standpoint. But the second tier of what we're really investing in is we have to also acknowledge that the world we live in today is different than the world we're going to live in tomorrow. And we have to build in resiliency and adaptation to make sure that at least for us as a company and us as Georgians, that we're around in another, not us particularly as individuals, but that we have a environment that, allows healthy people and communities that have access to low-cost clean energy and clean drinking water, and that we can feed the growing population, even if that agricultural practice has to move or change. And so that's sort of the areas that I'm focused in, and specifically 3 areas I thought I would just touch on really quickly where we are investing. The first is sustainable agriculture. Governor Cox, the founder, was a farmer. That's pretty much our only connection as a company to agriculture. These days, if you know Cox, we're media, automotive services, and telecom. But agriculture was really important to me. I actually grew up the next state over. I grew up on Mississippi's easement to the Gulf of Mexico, the little, South Mississippi right on the Gulf Coast. And so both sides of my family were farmers. I also grew up looking up a river that all this nasty stuff was coming down, and I didn't know who was up there doing it, but it sort of became my problem in the Gulf of Mexico. And so agriculture was important to me, and it's important to the company because how do we feed this growing population? And so we've got some really interesting investments I'll just highlight really quickly that I think are pretty cool. One is we made an investment early this year in controlled environment agriculture. So think of this as using the nature's processes, but sort of controlling the inputs, the light, the water, the temperature, the humidity. And what's great about that is you can move the agricultural process, the production, to where the consumption is happening. And so you also can create surety of safety and surety of supply. You don't have to worry about pathogens. You don't have to worry about natural events. And what the retailers and consumers love about this is it also creates a fresher product because it's not in a truck going across the country. The company's called Bright Farms. They're actually the leading provider of local packaged salads in the U.S. today. And so because of this, there's less waste, obviously. It tastes better because it's closer. 80% less water, 90% less land, and 95% less fuel to produce something that people are eating. And so that's an area where I'm really excited. The second area in agriculture is soil health management. If you talk about growing things in an indoor facility, that is absolutely adaptation and resiliency. But that does not really help broadacre crops. You're not going to grow soybeans and corns and things like that inside. That's a really big building. So unfortunately, as climate changes, you're possibly going to have to relocate where these things are growing, and the soil there may or may not be conducive to that. And so there are also issues around pollution runoff, all the algae things that we're getting. A lot of the stuff that I saw when I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico with the dead spot that just seems to get worse and worse. So just this week, we actually closed an investment in a company. I can't mention the name yet because we haven't done a press release, that is in sustainable fertilizer. And so 40% of traditional fertilizer just is lost. It goes up as nitric acid, which turns into a greenhouse gas, or it ends up in the water system, water table, ponds, streams, lakes, oceans, gulfs. What's really interesting about this product is a couple things. They create what they call a matrix structure, which is sort of science, chemistry talk for how you bond the nutrient load together and keep it from coming out until you're ready. That's engineered to match the uptake of the particular crop. And so by doing that, they have a 90% increase in effectiveness in getting those nutrients to the crop versus getting them to the Gulf of Mexico where you really don't want them. The neat thing about a matrix structure versus coatings is it also is water independent. So if you put the coating time release things, if you've ever done this in your yard and it rains a bunch, it's all gone. This uses microbes in the soil that eats the amino acids, and so it's a much more predictable time release structure. On the other side of things, it's really interesting. One of their ingredients to do this in their secret recipe is waste, organic waste, people waste, animal waste, just typical organic waste. And so it's literally a 1-to-1. 1 ton of waste goes into 1 ton of fertilizer in the process. And so you're using something that was considered basically a cost center that now is a valuable asset. And what this waste does, in addition to help creating these matrix bonds, is you also are putting this organic material back into the soil. And so you're actually rejuvenating the health, or potentially taking an area of land that was not farmable before and creating the right sort of makeup of that soil with this fertilizer. So really interesting and a huge opportunity to have probably one of the biggest impacts in the environment that I know of any of our investments today. Second area we're focused in is energy services. I think you just saw some slides. I think probably everybody here has this bent a little bit, and so you notice that, realize these mega trends of distributed, decarbonized energy are coming. We at Cox had been doing energy services for Cox for 20 years, and so it's sort of the staple and our knowledge base. And so I'm really interested in companies and technologies that can help address this changing power grid where before the model was easy. You made some power at a power plant and it went out and somebody used it. Now it's distributed. You've got consumers that are now producing and consuming, and nobody, your average consumer, just wants somebody else to deal with that they trust. And the electric utility wants someone who can manage all of those assets for the benefit of the greater good. And so one of the biggest opportunities today in carbon emissions is buildings. I think the number I saw is 40% of emissions come from buildings. And a lot of those buildings have been challenging in the past to do anything from an energy standpoint. Most of the current technologies and business models attack a very small percentage of those. We made an investment a while ago with a company called Carbon Lighthouse, who uses really cheap sensors to deploy in these buildings. And what they do through their sensors and algorithms is collect a plethora of data. And then think of it like your car, the little computer in your car that's tuning it up every second of every day. We can do that in the buildings to drive 20 to 30% savings with no required upfront costs. So think of it as, rather than investing in new stuff, you just get your other stuff running as good as it possibly can. So really excited about that from an energy standpoint, but I'm also excited from a data standpoint because as we design these buildings, I'm an engineer originally by degree, but we'd all be in trouble if I did any of that these days because it's been a while. Engineers design buildings based on calculations. We'll have the data now to design buildings based on real world fingerprints of what these buildings look like, which I think is a huge possibility going into the future. And then the last area I just want to touch on, which I'm really excited about because it's near and dear to my heart, is we call it waste to X, which is sort of fancy for waste to everything else, other than burying it in a hole in the ground, which is what we do with waste today. I sort of think of our waste system it's like this imaginary conveyor belt where everybody throws stuff on it. Maybe you pick something off of it if a milk jug is valuable, but it ends at some hole in the ground somewhere, right? And that's really the model that we've used for a long, long time. We've got 2 investments in that space. One's right here in Atlanta, and it deals with plastics. I think the stat I just saw from one of the professors at UGA is they estimate 8 million tons of plastics end up in the oceans every year because most people that aren't in the waste sector or the recycling sector don't realize that 90% of plastics are not recycled. 80% goes in the landfill, 10% might be burned or done something else with, but a very small percentage of plastics, no matter what you put in your recycle bin, are actually going anywhere other than the landfill because there's no recycling ferry that's going to sort that stuff out. They just want to get the high value stuff and put the rest there. And so this company actually does a molecular chemical recycling process where they can take this plastic material that's not being recycled today and convert it back into virgin feedstock. So it can be done over and over and over and over, and so you can keep these plastics in the economy. The other area is sort of what's at the end of that conveyor belt rather than a hole, and it's an earlier stage company, but they created a modular unit that sort of replaces the hole with a factory that takes unsorted municipal solid waste and converts it into chemicals and fuels. And so it's a different home for this trash to go other than just to be buried in the ground and sealed up for all of eternity. And so the exciting part of being able to do that is now you can bring the waste processing to where the waste is being produced. You also can potentially do development and revitalization. My hope is eventually we'll be able to go into existing landfills and remine those. We've got ones here in Atlanta that everybody knows of. How cool would that be to turn that into something good other than a landfill? And so really exciting about those technologies. So a lot more to come as we build this business here. But I always like to tell people, a lot of people don't even know who Cox Enterprises is if you're not in one of our cable markets because we don't use that brand a lot. But also just want people in Atlanta to be proud that this is an area that's becoming the nucleus for like clean tech investing. I hate getting on a plane and going to San Francisco to go out and have meetings when we can be doing all that here in Atlanta. And so we're trying to really build and bolster that ecosystem here through Techstars and some other things. So I'll stop there, and then we can probably dig in a little bit deeper as we go through questions. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Donald Chase. I'm a farmer in Macon County, Georgia, just down the Flint River from the airport, about 2 hours. And I've titled this topic today on a play of words, ag climatization. And the point there being that what I think we're seeing in agriculture is like an acclimatization to new rules, new conditions. And these are the kind of things that I think we have to face as we go forward. But I'd like to lay a little groundwork for you, if you will. And I think as a general rule, most farmers maybe are a little skeptical of climate change. And I think there are two really valid reasons why farmers are that way. Number one, we are weather dependent. We see variability in the weather from year to year. We've seen it for a long time. It is exactly what we do. The other point is that we're optimists. And we're always hoping that next year is going to be a little better. And we won't have to face these climate changes and what have you. But let me just point out a couple of things to you. Uh-oh. That's a cotton field in southwest Georgia following Hurricane Michael in 2018. We consider timber to be part of agriculture as well, so you see that nice stand of timber. And 2018 was not the only year of challenges, folks. This was in October 9th of 2019. A friend of mine was irrigating his peanut crop so he could dig. It was too dry for him to dig that peanut crop. I can tell you that these kinds of things have made us more aware as farmers about what's going on. And I'm going to bring this quote to you because this is my father. We don't know what's going on, but something is going on. As you can see, he's been doing it a few years. And the other sobering point I need to bring to you is this slide right here. What's happening to our income as farmers? This is nationwide. This is put out by the American Farm Bureau Federation. You can see it on USDA's website. Times are tough down on the farm. Not just from climate variability, and not just from the potential for catastrophic losses, but from lower commodity prices. And so many of our farm families are suffering today. But, as I mentioned before, we're optimistic. So what do we do? Well, I really love that everyone has mentioned sustainability, because that's what we're focusing on, producing the most and utilizing the least amount of resources. So how do we do that? And this is where I'd really like to spend some of our time together. We utilize technology. And I'd like to point out that biotechnology means more than just GMO crops. There are other ways of accomplishing the same things. But it's bringing seeds to us where we can get better traits and things that consumers like more. I'm afraid sometimes that we may feel a little put off by particularly the GMO things. But let me tell you what GMOs have allowed us to do. We've made less trips across the field. For those of you who don't know, less trips across the field mean less greenhouse gases. We've been able to plant cover crops. Now, what do cover crops do for us? When something is growing on that soil year-round, does that help our carbon situation? I mean, that's the kind of things that, yes, we're not really big fans of Monsanto. I'll just confess that to you. But nonetheless, it's allowed us to think about things. And I think that we're probably just on the cusp of finding new ways that we can increase that sustainability. We've increased some technology in equipment. For those of you who got to see Dr. Validas' presentation, he talked about variable rate irrigation. And I think that was a really good way for us to increase water use efficiency. Water use efficiency in this state is almost the holy grail, if you will. But by using auto steer and GPS units, we're again minimizing our trips across the field. We're making sure that when we apply fertilizers, and I appreciate that talk about fertilizers. When we apply fertilizers, we are applying them in the most efficient and using precision agriculture and soil testing so that we use those things only where we need them and only at the right time, the right place, and everything. That's really critical. The other thing, and Dr. Valitas talked about this, is using sensors to measure when our crops need water. And I was really excited because he verified something that I was going to talk about, is that we can actually increase yields while increasing water use efficiency. And that's pretty powerful because that's an easy sell. As a farmer, I'm all into that. UAVs, drones, I think this is another one of those areas that's given us new opportunities. I think we're just kind of getting there, but I'm sure we can use those to manage our inputs. Big data is kind of scary to farmers, but I think there's going to be some opportunity for us to use that data to improve our efficiencies with the metrics. This one probably may be a little controversial, but it's important that farmers in their quest for efficiency match that farm size to the efficiency. I'm thinking particularly in the animal agriculture. You know, we have a burgeoning poultry industry here in the state. I'm a poultry farmer, have been my entire life. The dairy industry as well has become really concentrated. And while it may not hold up the cachet that small farms do, I can tell you personally, a friend of mine is one of the largest dairy producers in the state. They do a really good job of managing animal health, managing the waste stream. So, and in some of these larger dairies are also capturing the methane produced to produce electricity. So there are efficiencies to be gained in farm size. Now, I don't know how far that goes. Every farmer, I think, has to make those decisions for themselves. But clearly there are some efficiencies to be gained. And the final one here that I've put down is to diversify. You know, Georgia agriculture is perhaps one of the most diverse agricultures in the state of Georgia. We have animal production, we have timberlands, we have food, fiber, vegetables. I mean, just you name it, we almost can grow it here except the tropicals. But the thing about it is we're not a monoculture agriculture in the state of Georgia. We have trees. For most of our cattle production in the beef industry, that uses land that probably couldn't be used for row crop agriculture. So it's kind of a really diverse operation. Next, I will point out to you, I don't know that I put this in my bio, but I have 2 1-megawatt solar facilities that I've placed in some of the areas that can't be farmed. And I think a lot of farmers are looking at this, and particularly with the profitability problem we have in agriculture, solar farms and those solar rentals are indeed attractive for farmers right now. Well, I'm here to tell you that same economic sustainability equals the environmental sustainability. And I will tell you that I'm involved in an effort, and I'm going to just give this little plug to the peanut industry, what I think is the most sustainable crop grown in the United States. And we are measuring our sustainability as peanut farmers. And you see these metrics here, all important things to helping combat climate change: land use, soil conservation, soil carbon, irrigation water use, greenhouse gas, energy, and water use. These are the 8 metrics that we measure in field to market. I don't know if any of you are familiar with field to market, but it incorporates most of the major crops grown in the United States. And I'm chairman of the American Peanut Council Sustainability Committee, so this is kind of big to me, and I'm excited about what peanuts do. Peanuts don't use fertilizer, just so you know. Eat more peanuts. I can always plug to eat peanuts, right? This is a spider graph for those of you who are familiar with. It's in our National Indicators report from Field to Market. And you can see the progress that we've made over the years in terms of these metrics. And I will also, I'm a peanut fan, but I want to tell you, we also participate with cotton. and national corn growers, and all of the crops. I think we're all focused on how we can do our farming operations to achieve these same type of efficiencies and same type of things that are good for our environment. And so with that, I will close, and sorry, I'll leave it there. But I'm excited about the opportunities we have as farmers. We love our soils. We love what we do. We love our environment. And I think that we're going to play a part. We have a part to play in helping to curb climate change. And we're victims of perhaps climate change, but I think that the better idea is that we want to be a player in doing our part to minimize it. And I thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Jeff Pratt. I'm president of Green Power EMC. I work for the Electric Cooperatives of Georgia, and they formed this company, Green Power EMC, back in 2001 to be an entity that sources renewable energy for their, by the way, I said 2001. It's a long time ago. Before I was talking much about climate change, many of you were thinking about it and working on it back then, I know. But the co-ops had thought about climate change or thought about changes in what was going to happen a long time ago. But you're going to find that the business case, if you will, for the co-ops has really come into its place in the last few years with respect to doing some things that are good for business and good for our environment and good for climate change. So good for helping manage climate change. How's that? By the way, I'm very cognizant of the great speakers we've had before and some very interesting stuff that we've already covered. And again, this cocktail hour I keep hearing about. And Chris, you picked the absolute worst person to be in that role. I am not known for my brevity, but I'm going to work hard. I got a hook. Yeah, I knew he did. So a couple things about Green Power EMC. Did you know the co-ops in Georgia, when I think of land, serve about over 70% of the land area in the state of Georgia? So they're big players in that. And when I listen to the speakers here, I start thinking about how all of these topics intertwine. As we talked about some of the things that Cox is working on, some of the oil and gas issues and topics that relate to climate change with our first speaker, and then all the way through to agriculture, that's near and dear to the hearts of our co-ops. And you're going to find that in just a few slides here that how all of this is interconnected and how I hope that our co-ops will continue to look for opportunities to engage in this area. First, what are the assets that we've been working on for 18 years, 19 years, a long time? These are them. These are those. And so we started with landfill gas. That's some of that buried organic matter that, since you have it there, you might as well gather some of the methane, which we do, and burn it and get some good value out of it, and you put it to second use. So we do that. It's not the best way, I agree with Steve, but it's certainly got to be done, and it's been good value for us early on. Then we went to hydro, run-of-river hydro. As far as I know, we're still the only certified run-of-river hydro facility in the state. It's very small, but we have it, and it's we're glad to have that. Wood waste wood in the forests, methane generators. We gather that and produce some electricity from that. Wind, not much wind, folks. These are wind towers that are demonstrations at schools in Georgia, but I'm waiting for that special place in Georgia we could do some cost-effective wind, and come see me if you got a good idea there. The third is solar. The last is solar here, not third, but you're going to find solar has become and you know this, solar has become a real opportunity for the state of Georgia, and they've done a lot, and our co-ops have been no stranger in that area. Well, early on, back in 2010, we had 32 megawatts of renewable energy. That was the largest utilities program in the state with respect to renewable energy. That figure stayed pretty much the same until late 2015. So 5 more years. Let's keep that timeline going. But in the last few years, our growth in renewable energy, primarily because of the changes in solar energy, has went up dramatically. In fact, don't know good study on this, but I think I can say it in this room that based on the surveys I've seen of co-ops in the country, Georgia leads the renewable energy and solar in particular, solar efforts in the country, and probably is doing half of all the solar that co-ops are doing in the country. That's very impressive for that group. So 1,200 megawatts, that's a lot of solar. We're going to have a lot more than that in the state, probably 5,000 megawatts in the next 5 years or so. But this is a meaningful piece of what's going on. And certainly I hope it adds some value to our carbon issues in the country. We do that through small projects and large ones. And they're located throughout the state. In all parts of the state. You'll find that there's the volume, though, have to admit, is all in the volume of solar is in South Georgia. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, which we can talk about over a beer. I'd love to find some more in North Georgia, so help us find that opportunity in a cost-effective way, and we'd love to do that. I love the connections that Mr. Chase and others made with solar energy and agriculture. We're finding a way, we're trying to find good ways to pull those together, because it's a fact. We use a lot of land with solar panels, and many times it's on old peanut farms. Okay? Now, is that a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, is it a good thing? There's a cost to everything we do in our environment. Everything we touch, we impact. But I've got a story here at the end here. I hope that we'll start bringing that back around to something meaningful. I'm certainly excited about it, so I hope that you are too. And wait, if you don't like it, wait till the beer, and then we can talk some more, okay? And that is something called regenerative energy. This is a take on regenerative farming, regenerative agriculture. If many of you probably are very aware of that. And this is a project that one of our largest partners, Silicon Ranch, has branded in placing a center of excellence in Southwest Georgia to explore this in a meaningful way. I'm hoping of all of our solar land that we have in Georgia, we'll have in the next 3 years, which will be over 10,000 acres of land, we'll actually have sheep or something like that on it to help manage the land. It'll help do a couple other things, though, too. It'll produce energy above the ground through photovoltaics, and then that word photosynthesis will produce good, sustainable land underneath those solar panels. And the regenerative energy part of this is managed grazing. So you take all this, the sheep, and work on that property in a managed way that results in sequestered carbon. There's a lot of studies out there about that. I'm not sure how we're going to measure it yet, but that's one of the challenges. But people understand that you can sequester carbon and, what was the other topic? Water in the soils if you manage them well. Well, since we have solar projects and we're producing energy in a clean way, why not take that land and put it back to use, sequester some carbon, produce some food product in a managed, sustainable way, and store more water in those 10,000 acres than we could have before. So it's just getting started, and we have a long ways to go to measure the effects of this and opportunities, but I'm learning that there's a huge body of knowledge and information and people out there who are really excited about this sort of thing and pulling solar back into the agricultural community and tying those two together even more than just making the land more sustainable for farms, but pulling those pieces together so that they are working together to produce food, education, carbon sequestration, and all those other good pieces that we want to have happen. It's part of the circular economy, and I think it's really good for business, Chris. So I'm excited about that and look forward to talking to you guys soon. would you mind? Chris, I'm so sorry. I told you I would not get out of here without one more. There's real science to this, okay? And I've put this up here because this is an example farm. This is the first one that we're laying out today that solar has been into construction. And you'll see, you can kind of tell what the solar panels are. Let me see some nods. Make sure I'm okay. And then the fencing, the land area is the red, and some fencing around the solar farms is the yellow. And you think for sheep that might be good enough, right? You got a fence, put them in there and let them go. Well, it's not quite that simple. If you want to do managed grazing, we're taking this to another level where we put partitions and fences within the solar facility so we can manage and not overgraze. Not only that, they have to have water, folks. And so this is a real project and a real process to make it work well. And so I put these in here for a purpose because it told me when I started looking into this is a science and it's a real process that really helps make all this work well. Thank you very much, and sorry for the misfire there, Chris. Thank you.
So I'm aware, again, of the cocktail hour, and I know a lot of you guys want to spend some time with our speakers and ask them some individual questions. So guys, I'm going to ask one question, and then everybody else can ask the questions over cocktails, all right? So Jeff, we'll start with you. And by the way, I was told earlier that Jeff was the mad scientist of green power, and I think we saw that today in a very good way. And you can also see the passion of everybody here, but if you were king for the day in Georgia, what's the one thing you would say should be our priority to address climate change and sustainability? So Jeff, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to work back this way to give these guys a little bit longer to think about it.
So there's a lot of things that I would think about with respect to just making changes happen. But as a reality, it's going to take, we need to keep in mind the pieces that will create business opportunity for us, because that creates win-win situations and makes adoption toward practices much easier. So if I were king for a day, I would do a deep dive into things like Steve was talking about in items that will raise, improve the income statements, that will improve carbon sequestration and improve our environment all together at the same time. We need to hit those straight up front.
That's pretty great. Donald, what do you think?
Well, I don't want to be negative, but I saw some things that were going on in the EU recently where they were limiting animal numbers, and those are the kind of things I think we need to resist. But I think in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, if we continue to fund good research in our wonderful public university system, and how do we achieve it, not just in the agricultural community, but everywhere? How do we get these young, brilliant scientists who believe in this climate change, who believe that we can do something about it, and keep it out of the politicians' hands? Because the politicians are going to make public, they're just playing with it, and it's got to come from the ground up.
That's great. Steve?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff, and I don't feel like there's one thing.
All right, go for it.
The first thing I would do is try to tear down the barriers to unlock the potential of some of these things. Like, for instance, electric tariffs. If you can tear down some of these barriers to allow people to make rational business decisions, then the technologies will get there. And then back to solar, I think the second thing I would think about is the model for solar worked. The investment tax credit brought investors in. I was investing in solar in 2001 when people thought solar panels would eat your soul. And I got great returns on those. Nowadays, infrastructure funds beat me out. I don't do much solar anymore because they're willing to take low single-digit returns, and I have to do better than that. And so I always Jeff mentioned the sheep. I always say I try to be the sheep that goes and grazes where the rest of the sheep aren't because the grass is longer.
Yeah.
From an investment standpoint, I try to do that, but there's proven models that were in place with solar that drove the cost down, and we can do that with other technologies. And it's not to say that you should have things, you should have things that stay in place, into perpetuity, but let's unlock the potential of some of these really smart people and business models by just sort of taking the handcuffs off and letting them go do what they do best.
Awesome. Wyatt?
Well, thank you. I would make Nick Saban governor. I'm from Alabama. I'm just kidding.
Well, wait a minute. If that means he's not going to coach anymore, that might not be a bad idea.
So anyway, that is a joke.
I might get on board
That's
with
a
that.
joke. Bear with me. Bear with me. No, forget that then. I would say I think that one of the great challenges you look at trying to make sure that you have a robust middle class that can participate in economic growth and the needs of the industry. I would invest more heavily in STEM education at very early stages where children be a little bit more engaged in, and we do a Energy Day program in Houston with a lot of different industry groups to expose children to STEM. And we had 27,000 as a free public event called Energy Day down in Houston. Examples like that really focus more on STEM because it doesn't matter what subsector in the energy space you're talking about or what part of the economy, we need workers who have the technical capacity to build upon. So.
That's great. And I'll just say from my perspective, it's tearing down this partisan battle between the two. And it goes back to Nixon versus the Science Council and the ballistic missiles back almost 50 years ago. And when you look at the statistics and you look at the polling in 2007, business, consumers, general population, they cared about this issue. They were wanting to invest in it. The bottom dropped out. You couldn't afford to invest. You couldn't afford to care about it. It came back probably around 2014 and 2015 is a major issue, but by that point it had become literally weaponized by both sides. And that's where we are today. And so it's going to be groups like that are in this room. It's going to be a diverse group to bring Republicans and Democrats together to find sensible solutions down the middle. It's not just a carrot, it's not just a stick, it's somewhere in the middle. So that's going to be mine. Blair, I'll turn it back over to y'all. Thank our panel for their time today and for their passion.